This is the Public Affairs Forum, sponsored by the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin, Texas. This is a public affairs forum we've been conducting since 1954, in which we invite community leaders in to tell us about concerns that they have for themselves and for us. We do this to educate our church members and those in the community, and indeed to propel us to action. Today, we're very fortunate in having a local representative from the State House of Representatives, Ms. Vikki Goodwin. Ms. Goodwin represents House District 47, and she has stood with us, and working class people and common people indeed, with the bills she's proposed and the things she has supported in the legislature. And so we welcome her today. Ms. Goodwin.
Good afternoon. So I am Vikki Goodwin, thank you. And I don't know if any of y'all have allergies, but the allergies are kind of getting to me in the last couple of days, so water may come in very handy. So I am often in groups of people who aren't familiar with me, and the way I like to break the ice is to say, I am State Representative Vikki Goodwin. Who is your representative? And I get a lot of responses. Oftentimes it's the poker face. Like, I know I should know that, but I really don't. Sometimes I get dogged, and I say, no, that's federal, I'm state. Sometimes I get the deer in the headlights look, but I just take it as an opportunity to educate them and to let them know how important it is to know who your state representative is. You know, oftentimes people think, well, I agree with you, so I don't necessarily need to reach out to you. But really it is helpful because oftentimes we do hear from the other side. And so it's good to hear from people who do agree with us from time to time as well. I also think that my job, as much as representing people, is to educate. You know, we haven't had a Democratic leader statewide, a statewide Democrat win election in 30 years, really since Ann Richards. And so how do we get people out to vote? How do we inspire them, motivate them, and educate them? One of my favorite tools is vote411.org. Anyone here use that? And then particularly when I'm in a group of younger folks, I try to explain why is it named that? Because maybe they aren't familiar with 1411, which is what you used to dial, or at least what I used to dial when I was younger. To get information on the phone, you could dial that number and get somebody's phone number. So it was information. So really, it's voteinformation.org. And so from there, I think maybe it will stick in their minds a little bit better. And I even put that on the push cards that I hand out so that people can get the information they need. I think so often people don't vote because maybe they weren't taught as a kid, like I was, that every election is important. How many of you have ever heard, this is the most important election of your lifetime? Like every election cycle, right? So I think every election is the most important because it's the current election and really important things are going on. Really important consequences come of every election cycle. The first time I ran in 2018, there were 12 of us who flipped seats in Texas. And you know what? That made such a big difference in how things operated in the Texas House of Representatives. It was a more cordial and what a lot of us called the kumbaya session, coming on the heels of a really tough session. But then in 2020, there was no change in numbers. That election cycle, the same number of Democrats and Republicans were in the Texas House. And so guess what? The Republicans felt like this is vindication. We've been told that we're in charge. We have the majority. And so that definitely made a difference in the environment on the floor. And of course, that was when we passed the election bills. Now, I knock on a lot of doors and talk to a lot of people. And I really enjoy that part of it, because I think getting feedback from individuals is really important. So I remember some of the doors more than others. This one young man answered the door, had a 1-year-old on his hip, and when I was talking to him, he said, I'm in high tech, I travel all the time for work, I'm very, very busy, I just don't think I can vote this election cycle. And I said to him, but it's so important. Let me tell you why it's so important. And then he said, well, I know, but I'm going to be out of the country. And I said, well, let me tell you one thing that I did last session at a time when it was really hard for the minority party to get anything passed. I said, do you know that now women who are about to give birth or just gave birth are able to vote by mail? And he said, I didn't know that. And that is something that I did. We had all these horrible election bills going on. One of them was changing the vote by mail law to where now you have to put numbers on the back of the envelope, and that anytime you change the way voting goes, that causes confusion and oftentimes suppresses the vote. We certainly didn't want the bill to pass, but if it was going to pass and we knew it was going to pass, why not add something to it that would benefit some people? I remembered from my younger days, probably the only time I didn't vote was when I had little babies and it was just really hard. Voting by mail would have been much easier and probably would have facilitated me voting in those elections. So I think that we have to inspire and motivate and educate every day. That is how we get people to vote. So often we hear candidates say that we're not a red state, we're a non-voting state. And I truly believe that's the truth because I think the vast majority of Texans agree with us on so many issues. Take public education. The vast majority of Texans support their public schools. 96% of students go to public schools. And so this idea of taking our public dollars and sending it to private schools is not tenable. We know that will take money, much needed money out of our public schools. Already we aren't paying our teachers what we ought to be paying them. And so we saw that in this last session. The regular session, we voted on an amendment to the budget that says we are not going to send public dollars to private schools. And then we had 4 special sessions. 3 of those special sessions, the bill didn't even make it out of committee. We realized that this horror is just going to keep going on unless we bring the bill to the floor and finally vote. And it was very nerve-wracking. I don't know about y'all, but I was very concerned that we weren't going to have the numbers that we needed. But you know what? In rural Texas, schools are the backbone of their communities. They really care about their public schools, the teachers, the students, and so that is what saved our public schools. I would have thought that would send a message to the governor and the lieutenant governor to say, look, the vast majority of Texans support public schools. Let's move on. Let's work on some issues that are real important right now, like water infrastructure. There's a million other issues that we could be working on. But no, they are very, very focused on this push for vouchers, and it won't stop. It won't stop just because we voted it down in 5 sessions in 2023. It will come back. And there was recently an article in Texas Monthly about Tim Dunn. Anyone read that article? It talks about this one man that has a vast amount of money, and he uses that vast amount of money for power in politics. And so he's an oil billionaire. He has been funding things, not just campaigns, but his money also supports the scorecard. So does anyone know what the scorecard is? It's basically a tool that is used to keep office holders in line, okay? So I learned about this in my second session when I was sitting in the member lounge with Travis Clardy. He's a representative from East Texas. He was becoming known as a moderate Republican. Oh no. And he needed to change that image because he was worried if people saw him back home as a moderate that he would get a primary opponent. And so how is he going to fix that? Well, it all boils down to the scorecard. So after we have this, we take votes on bills, but we also have local and consent calendar where you might have 50 or more bills on one calendar, and you vote for them all at one time. So typically everybody votes yes because these are local and consent, meaning there's really no opposition to them, or they only deal with one representative's district. So I saw him sitting next to me marking a page, no, 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 no. I said, what are you doing? He says, well, I get Briscoe Kane's sheet that he gets from the journal clerk, And we go and we mark no to some of the bills just to improve our scores on the scorecard. So basically, they were going down the list and marking no on all of the Democratic bills. But then what cracked me up is that he looks down and he realizes that Briscoe Cain had marked no on one of his bills. And he had just about voted no against his own bill because he was talking to me and not paying attention. So he quickly erased that. But I mean, that's how ridiculous it is. And it's so ridiculous that in this last session, I was working on a bill on drowning prevention. The family that I was working with lost their 6-year-old daughter to a drowning accident. They had come to me to get this drowning prevention bill passed, and in my second session, I got it out of the House, but I didn't get it out of the Senate. So we said, we will work with you again next session, but in redistricting, this family actually got moved into House District 19. So Ellen Troxclair is now their representative. They wanted Ellen Troxclair to be a joint author and to show support for the bill. So Ellen agreed. She was a joint author. And the bill went through local and consent. But then she voted against it. She got that page from the Journal clerk, and she voted against this bill. And boy, you know what? I probably never would have noticed. I don't look that carefully at the votes, particularly on local and consent. But you betcha that family noticed. And that was devastating to them. So let me tell you about the bills that I did pass, starting with Cotty's Act. This is for the De La Pena family who lost their 6-year-old daughter, Cotty, to a drowning accident. She was in the care of a child care center. They took her to a pool. The parents told them she doesn't swim, so please put a life jacket on her. They didn't do that. So the bill simply says if you're a child care provider and you're taking kids to a pool or a lake, you have to find out from the parents if the child can swim, and if not, you have to put a life jacket on. Very simple, very straightforward. But there was still a lobbyist who was trying to keep it from passing. We brought her in with the family and had a conversation, said, please don't kill this bill this session. And she says, oh, you want it to pass in the House? And I said, no, I want it to pass in the House and the Senate. But she was close friends with the chairwoman of the Public Health Committee where the bill would have gone. And she was still trying to kill it in the Senate, and we knew that. So we're like, we're going to have to be a little strategic here. So we had the parents go around. They found a supporter in Senator Perry. So he's chair of Natural Resources. Natural Resources deals with water. So he said, you get it out of the House, and I'll bring it through my committee, and I'll get it passed. And he did. So it passed into law, so we now have Cotty's Act. So the second bill also deals with a tragedy, and again, the parents wanted to do something to make sure other people don't go through the same tragedy they faced. So this is the Natalia Cox Act. She was a 21-year-old Houston Tillotson student. She had dated a man twice, but didn't want to go out with him again. He showed up at her apartment door, threatened her with a gun, so she called the police. Well, the police came and the man left. But unfortunately, 5 days later, he came back, and this time he was successful at getting in, and he shot and killed her. So very tragic, and we tried to understand why didn't the police give her information that would have helped her? Like, Safe Alliance can house women that are, or women or men, who are in a domestic violence situation. Therein lies the problem. It's not domestic violence because she wasn't in a relationship. She wasn't in an ongoing relationship. So by the definition of the law, it wasn't domestic violence. And so we thought, well, that's just crazy when that information could have helped her. So we decided, let's have the Health and Human Services Commission develop an informational brochure that can be used not just by law enforcement, but by universities, by healthcare professionals, by really anybody. It's on their website. It can be downloaded. We're trying to get out the word. I've talked to a sorority, a university, to spread the word because Natalia was involved in a sorority. And the information covers 3 main points. One is phone number. Who can you call to get help? And then they can direct you to a local service provider. So it's throughout the state. Number 2 is that you can get a protective order if you feel threatened. And someone that says, I can't afford an attorney, there are resources out there. And it gives you that information. And number 3 is that you can exit a lease agreement. So you don't feel safe in your apartment, You can now, I mean, it's in current law, but she went to her landlord and said, I'd like to move to a different apartment. They said, well, you're going to have to fill out a new application, pay a new application fee, pay a new security. She's living in their apartment complex. That's crazy, right? I mean, they should have helped her. But regardless, this brochure will give information, and we've also been working with the Texas Apartment Association to say, can you educate your landlords and your property managers to help, to be more helpful, to be more responsive, you know, not put a lot of barriers in the way of people moving to safety. So that's the Natalia Cox Act. That one was carried by Senator Alvarado, passed very early in session, and already the brochure is out there live on the website. The third bill has to do with mental health because, as we know, mental health is a huge issue right now. If you talk to school principals, school teachers, it's a crisis. And I've always wanted to work on the issue of mental health. So we carried two bills, one that has been very, very difficult to pass because of the interests. It's allowing some psychologists with extra education to be able to prescribe medication. Very limited, a lot of guardrails. Very, very tough to pass. We'll perhaps continue to try, but it's just, we knew that wasn't going to pass. So I had two LPCs, licensed professional counselors, come to me and talk to me about AccuDetox. They said, you know, there's state law that says that we can use this, but we can only use it if someone has a chemical dependency. But we found that it's helpful for stress, anxiety, trauma, PTSD, all sorts of things. And we'd love to be able to use it without that diagnosis, that chemical dependency diagnosis. Now, it can be used for that too, of course, but we just want to expand what it can be used for. And we also want to expand who can get trained and licensed to provide the treatment. So that's what that bill does. We asked them to come into the Capitol and to provide sample sessions to members and their staffs so that we could get an idea of what is it they're talking about. So AccuDetox is like acupuncture, but only in the ear. So it's 5 needles. It's also called 5-needle protocol. It's often used in conjunction with talk therapy. So you might go to talk therapy and then join a group for a group session of AccuDetox. But what people liked is that it's very inexpensive, it's non-pharmaceutical, and also the military has used it quite extensively. So veterans coming back from Afghanistan or military members coming back have been offered this treatment, and they came and testified and said how beneficial it was. So that's the third one, AccuDetox expansion. And then the fourth bill came about in prior sessions. I had been on the Environmental Regulation Committee. Love the committee, wanted to continue on that, but it's the speaker that decides what committee we're put on, and I asked a lot of really tough questions in that second session. It was really in the interim when we went and had an interim hearing in Odessa, and I said, oh, Odessa's really close to this area that has had some real problems because of the oil and gas industry and abandoned oil wells. And one of the ranchers had come and testified at the Capitol, and he said there's this toxic lake, Lake Beamer, in Imperial, close to Odessa. So I suggested, why don't we take the committee to see it and to hear from this rancher and to really understand what's going on? Because I think when you put your eyes on a problem, it really solidifies what's going on. So I thought it was a great idea. Chairman didn't really think so. Chairman is from Midland, from the oil industry, very supportive of the oil industry, doesn't like it when negative things about the oil industry are brought up. So he asked the speaker to put me on a different committee. I was put on agriculture and livestock. I mean, my district, okay, we all wear clothes, we all eat food, so, you know, I think it's relevant to anybody. It's just not what I have focused on. So I had my staff look at what Senate bills would be coming through the committee so I didn't have to recreate the wheel and figure out what would be a logical bill. Now I will say the chairman of the committee, Briscoe Kane, not someone I see eye to eye with on a lot of policy, but he did tell all the members of the committee that he would try to get at least one bill out. And so he stood with his word. My bill was Senator West's bill. It sets up a Texas Food Resiliency Commission to help farmers, food banks, and address the issue of food deserts. Now, in his area, food deserts are a real problem. And so we got the bill out of committee with Briscoe Kane helping to do so. It got on the floor and he voted against it. But that's okay. It did pass. I went to all the Republican members and said, the Texas Farm Bureau is in favor. You should vote for this bill. So we squeaked by because, you know, it also helps food banks. And I don't know why, but not everybody wants to help our food banks, you know, crazy as that seems. So that was set up, and it allows for some federal dollars to be sent through the state to our food banks, and to also address issues like after winter freeze Uri, there were a lot of vegetables left in the fields that went bad because there wasn't a plan of how to address that. Same thing after flooding. So this commission is also there to look at our food pipeline. You know, how are we getting food to people, particularly even with the extreme weather, with the climate change that we can't talk about in the legislature. So we didn't say climate change or anything like that. But all right. So those are the bills that I passed. I'm very proud because as a member in the minority party, as a still relatively junior member, getting bills passed isn't easy, and I feel like these are really substantial bills. So I was very proud of getting those passed. I had an amazing staff. I don't know if y'all know Pooja Sethi, my chief of staff. She's amazing. I also have Cole Wilson here. He's my new legislative director. So, you know, we can't do the work that we do without having great staffs, without building relationships. And that's what this is all about. You know, we have to build relationships with the other members in the majority party, which I know a lot of times people are like, I don't know how you do it. You know, they're people too. They have a lot of the same concerns we do. They just have a different way of thinking we can solve them in a lot of cases. I also wanted to talk about some people that I really admire. Like the person I most admire, particularly in the political world, is Ann Richards, right? Amazing person. So I read her autobiography and her biography recently, and one of the things I learned is that she went to Girls State. And that was one of the things that inspired her to get interested in government and running for office later. And I thought, you know, that's interesting. I have spoken to Boys State several times. They invite members to come and speak to the boys when boys from all across the state come to UT or Austin, and they build a model community. You know, they vote, have elections, they vote for a mayor, they, you know, pass legislation and things like that. So the third time I went out, I said to the man who organizes it, I love coming and speaking to the boys at Boys State, but what about Girls State? And he's like, yeah, we have Girls State. It's done by the auxiliary. I could tell this was not a high priority of his. But I think that's so unfortunate. You know, he says it takes place somewhere like Seguin, and they don't really care about having elected officials come talk to them. I'm like, really? I mean, did y'all ask the girls? Because I have a feeling, and even if they don't know that they'd be interested, I bet they'd be interested. So I really think this is going to be a priority for me to bring Girls State back to Austin, to have girls have that role model in front of them, speaking to them, telling them what it's like to serve in the state legislature. You know, I love doing that with the boys. I think we should do it with the girls too. And that came from Ann Richards. So many good things from her. I, again, think she is a wonderful, wonderful model. Another person that I really look up to is Gabby Giffords. Anyone here seen the documentary that was made about her? It's really good. And one of the things I came away with is her slogan, never give up. So Gabby Giffords was very moderate in Arizona. She had a campaign event in front of a grocery store and was shot. And the documentary shows her recovering and how hard that was, being shot in the head, gunshot victim. And I actually had a woman work for me in my first session. She has since moved to Galveston, and actually now she's like in France or something fun like that. But she was a gunshot victim. She was shot in the head. And my dad was shot and killed in our home in Dallas in 1990. So very, very personal issue. It's such a tragedy when you lose somebody in such a senseless way. And we're seeing so much of that these days. I just read an article in the Statesman today about how many people have died, and more people died in Texas from gunshot than in California, more than any other state. A lot of it is suicide. There are so many things that we could do to prevent this tragedy. Now, my first session, I did work with Donna Howard, amazing representative, on safe storage. And so that session, it was $1 million got put into the budget to create a public service announcement around safe storage, trying to encourage people to store their guns in a safe in their home. That could have potentially saved my dad's life, because the gun that was used was my brother's hunting rifle that burglars found in our home. So safe storage is important. And also, a lot of kids get a hold of their family's guns and accidentally shoot a sibling or a friend or themselves. So safe storage is important, but I think when things are voluntary, it's nice, but doesn't have quite the impact. So we're looking at what's the next step and how has this program helped? Are people buying gun safes? I also talk about gun safety in a way that the vast majority of Texans agree we've got to do something about this. Like, when our kids are going to school expecting that there will be a school shooter, maybe not in my school, but somewhere, and so these drills are, I almost feel like they're becoming numb to them, or they're traumatizing them, or both. So y'all might be surprised to know that there were 2 good gun safety bills that were authored by Republicans last session that got out of the House, but the lieutenant governor did not let them out of the Senate. So one of them was brought by a former Dallas police officer who's now a state representative, Frederick Frazier. He filed a bill to ban Glock switches, or little mechanisms that you put on a gun that makes them fire rapidly. It did get out of the House. We did try to amend it because it was towards the end of session. We could see that the Uvalde family's priority of raising the age to buy semi-automatic or buy assault-style weapons from 18 to 21 wasn't going to get out in time, wasn't going to reach the floor in time. So there were 2 of us who tried to amend the Glock switch bill with that bill. It didn't happen. That what they said it didn't pertain to the original bill, which I admit, it was a very narrow bill. So nevertheless, it gets out, goes to the Senate, and they don't do anything with it. The second bill is a straw purchase bill, which it's illegal now at the federal level to buy a gun for someone who asks you to buy a gun for them because they can't legally buy a gun, right? So if someone comes up to you and says, "Would you buy a gun for me?" You should say no. Because if they can't legally buy that gun, it's a straw purchase and you could be prosecuted. Currently, as a federal law, it has to be investigated and prosecuted by federal law enforcement, ATF, that sort of thing. So if we made it a state law, then our local law enforcement can investigate and prosecute, and that would be helpful. A lot of guns do get into the hands of criminals through straw purchases. So this would be a helpful bill, filed and passed out of the House by a Republican. Again, didn't go anywhere in the Senate. It did, but Dan Patrick said he didn't like the amendment that was on it. I don't know. I think he just didn't want it to pass. And I don't know why, because I think the vast majority of Texans, even gun-owning Republicans, feel like we should be doing some sensible things to make our communities safer. Again, when kids are going to school feeling like there's going to be a school shooting, something is wrong with our society. So I think that we did move the needle a little bit on the issue. We did get the raise the age bill out of committee. The Uvalde families came over and over and over to the Capitol, and that made a difference. When they're standing in front of you, it's really hard to say no. It's really hard to say, I don't care about what happened in your community. Nobody can do that. So instead, what they do is they play games, delay, and, well, it's somebody else's fault, it's the committee chair's fault, or what have you. But I think we just keep putting pressure on, and we keep talking to the other side of the aisle to say, look, it's not just Democrats, it's not just Republicans dying. You know, it's something that we've got to address. We can't just ignore it. Another really light issue is the border. So being on Homeland Security and Public Safety, that's one of the areas that we've addressed, Operation Lone Star, while I've been on that committee. However, I will say, as a committee member, I have like zero input. Okay, this is a governor priority, and all of the money that has been sent to that priority has really not had any impact from members of the committee. You know, I remember early on, I saw an article in the Texas Tribune about some of the National Guard members having committed suicide, or having complaints about being pulled away from their families, or being pulled away from school, or, you know, it just wreaking havoc on their lives by going to the border. So we went down and I met with some of the members. One of them that really had a big impact on me, she said, I'm a psychologist and I help the Air Force service members when they have mental health issues. And now I'm sitting on the banks of the river and watching and doing nothing. And it was so frustrating for her, because she has an area of expertise that not a lot of the members have, and she was pulled away from that to do something that really was not her area of expertise. It was because the governor said we need 10,000 people there. That's a lot of people. So we were pulling people away from their expertise, and they really couldn't do anything because this is a federal issue. So they would maybe help people out of the river, up the riverbank, and then say Border Patrol's over there. I mean, so yes, there are some issues that need to be addressed at the border, but there are better ways. There are better ways, and we are spending a god-awful lot of money on it. We could be spending better. So I've reached out to the members that live on the border, and we actually recently had a conversation with Congressman Veronica Escobar. Anyone hear of the Dignity Act? No. It's so frustrating because she lives on the border. She knows what it's like. She's talked to people in the organizations, in government, migrants. You know, she knows the issue and has worked with her Republican counterparts in Congress to put together this 500-page bill that would make a difference. It's got a lot of funding attached to it, but we're spending a lot of money anyway. So it would increase legal pathways to citizenship, and it would take law enforcement out of the detention business and make it a humanitarian. We're going to help people that are coming here to claim asylum, but we're not going to make it, we're going to treat them humanely. So there's a lot to the bill. I'm not going to go into it, but another thing that gives me hope is I read an article recently about Women of Welcome. And it's a Christian group of women who go down to the border, again, putting their eyes on the issue, on the situation. I think it's always so helpful to see for yourself. I've gone down to the border many times myself because, again, I think you need to talk to the people that are on the ground, that see the issue day to day and really understand what's going on. And that's how you solve problems. I don't know that we even agree with what the problem is, you know. I went to a dinner recently in Dallas. It was the Unity dinner for the travel industry. And one of the men there said, you know, I'm an independent. I see that we have a lot of job openings in the travel industry, hospitality industry. They're great jobs, but we can't fill them. We need people. I don't know, I hear that a lot. We need people in a lot of different industries, and yet we want to detain and punish and keep migrants from coming here. I think it's wrong thinking.
What was the bill you mentioned a minute ago?
The Dignity Act. So treating people with dignity, you know. And then most recently, sigh, Paxton has sued Annunciation House for their helping migrants, saying that they are human trafficking. We need some different leadership in this state. You know, my journalism teacher would be scolding me right now, saying you're supposed to lead with the most important information, and I forgot to say, yes, I'm running for my House seat for a fourth term, but I do plan to run for lieutenant governor in 2026. I think it's so important that we do everything in our power. I know a lot of the conversations when I tell people that, they're like, that's great. But in 2022, we had Beto and Mike Collier and Rochelle Garza, some amazing candidates. So what are we not doing right to get these great candidates with the ideas that so many of us believe in? Why are we not getting them elected? And again, I think it's because people don't know that we need to educate, inspire, and motivate. They need to understand why it impacts their lives. And so every group is different. What's important to you? You have to get that feedback and say, here's how I want to help you. Because the current leadership, they are not helping anybody but themselves and their cronies. All right, one of my big bills for next session is a stewardship amendment. Anyone hear of that? So, anyone go to Texas Book Festival? I went a couple of years ago, and one of the authors wrote the Green Amendment, so Maya von Rossum. And the idea behind it is that states should have in their constitutions a right for the citizens of that state to have clean air, clean water, and healthy soil. So, in the states that have passed it so far, they call it the Green Amendment. When I filed it, I think I may have started with the Green Amendment, but I thought this is just second green comes out of my mouth. People's minds are going to shut down in the House. So why don't we go with the stewardship? Stewardship means taking care of our earth, right? And I mean, everybody believes that we should take care of our earth. So last session, it was a little disappointing because the chairman of the committee was Tracy King of Natural Resources, the committee that the bill went through, and I didn't get a hearing. But at the same time, it was very new. We had just gotten all the language, and we hadn't done a lot of work around the advocacy part of it. You have to do a lot of work to get bills passed. So this time, we're doing that work. Via von Rossum came to Texas, and she's working with the owners of a small farm, a sustainable farm in East Austin called Green Gate Farms. They are huge proponents of this idea. They had a panel discussion. We're working on how do we galvanize people throughout the state to get behind this idea of a stewardship amendment. And so we're launching a little video of the panel discussion with a place where people can sign up and say, I want to support. And, every day I talk to people, I get more groups that want to join. It's really helpful to have organizations that can coalesce their members and have all these organizations on a long list of here are all the organizations and people in those organizations that support the stewardship amendment. So we're really working hard on that. If anyone has any questions, reach out to my office. Cole has been working with Maya von Rossum on getting the coalition built. So that's what we're doing right now, is building the coalition so that when we go into session, we are ready to really have our voices heard. All right, healthcare and Medicaid expansion. It's so frustrating because we felt like during the pandemic we were going to get there. Everybody saw the need. And yet here we are. I don't know why people don't see, particularly on the other side of the aisle, the benefits of having people have healthcare coverage so that they can go to primary care, so they can get their health taken care of before it becomes an emergency and they end up in the emergency room. I think that makes sense to everybody, and it's just the verbiage. Medicaid expansion. So, okay, fine, let's call it something else. Let's just get it done. That is something that we will continue to work on. All right, property tax relief. Anyone notice their property taxes going down? That was great. But 50% of Texans don't own their homes. They rent. And so we did nothing for them. But I would like to do something for them because rents have gone up exponentially, particularly in the Austin area. But what's funny is I traveled to West Texas recently for a water conference. We stayed one night in Fort Davis. The next morning, we had coffee in a coffee shop, and the woman that was serving us there was nobody there except for her and us. So we had this long conversation with her, and she ends up telling us that she moved from Fort Davis to Alpine because it was getting too expensive to live in Fort Davis. Her rent went up too much. It's like, really, out here in this rural area, prices, well, it's the Airbnb, people are, instead of selling their homes, they're keeping them and renting them out, and that pushes rent up across the board, even for long-term renters. So I have a proposal. One piece of the Property Tax Relief Act was this assessment cap. So if you own property that's $5 million or less in value, you automatically get an assessment cap of 20%. So like if you're a homeowner, you have a homestead exemption, which caps your assessment value at a 10% increase per year. This part of the bill that passed, so it is in effect, says any property owner, $5 million or less, gets a cap of 20% on their assessment value. So we're giving that away for free. I went to a tax conference, a lot of fun, after session, and they were talking about some unintended consequences with that. So it's a 3-year pilot program. My idea is let's let that expire, and let's put in place something that says if you are a landlord and you are willing to charge fair market rent or below, then you get an assessment cap. Fair market rent is determined by HUD, so we don't have to recreate the wheel. It's based on zip code, it's based on number of bedrooms, it's based on the idea that renters shouldn't pay more than 40% of their income on rent and utilities. So you can go online, type in fair market rent, and it'll show you the table. So again, why not give landlords an incentive to keep rents low? They don't have to participate, and then their assessment value is not capped, which is what we've had in the past. So if we're wanting to have a goal of keeping rents down, we have to do something to achieve that goal. And I think the Fair Rent Incentive Act would do that. So that, and boy, education is my passion. So public education, I talk to teachers almost every day, and they're just feeling really defeated, unappreciated. And a lot of that has to do with the legislature. We didn't pass the voucher bill, but we also didn't pass a funding bill. So their districts are all scrambling, using reserve funds or cutting positions. And it's really an untenable situation for our schools. The governor has linked the two together, and hopefully teachers see that, what he's doing. So I have a sister-in-law who teaches up in Allen, and I will tell you she voted for Abbott last time, but I have convinced her. She now swears to me, I will not vote for him next time. So we've got to get more teachers to understand that it is the governor. It's the governor that is keeping you from getting a raise or stressing out your school district. It's the governor who is showing no appreciation to our schools. It's the governor who says we have failing schools. Sir, if we have failing schools, we need to fix them. We need to figure out what's going on, not just pull a few students out and send them to private school. That's not the solution. So we've got to talk to everybody. We've got to inspire, motivate, and educate. And with that, I will open it up for questions. Yes.
Thank you, Representative Goodwin. I would, I don't know if you're aware of this, but I would remind everyone that since you brought up Governor Ann Richards, that she was a member of this church. As currently is Representative Donna Howard. So this church has produced some amazing women, and even a few men. So if you have questions, please hold up your hand and keep your questions short and to the point so we can hear Representative Goodwin's responses. And please state your name as I come to you.
Hi, I'm Dale Beulah, and I have a question of an article I read this last week that the state of Texas has refused to accept federal funds for summer food programs for children. And I wonder how we have the money to put razor wire to cut people up and no money to feed children.
Yeah, so I have written a letter, and there's actually members that are talking to the governor's office to try to remedy that so that we can pull down the federal dollars next summer. I think we have passed the deadline, unfortunately, and yeah. So the best we can do is say, let's get our ducks in a row for the next time that we can accept this money. I agree. I mean, that's just unbelievable and unacceptable. So, yes.
Hi, I'm Richard Halpin here, a member of this church, and have worked with you on a couple of things, and you're just a champion for the people, and we really appreciate your excellence in the legislature. It shines like a star amongst the darkness up there. Speaking of which, could we prosecute the governor on trafficking? I mean, he's sending all these people around on buses they don't want to go. He's confused them about why they're going and lied to them, and that's trafficking, you know.
There was one man that brought a lawsuit. I think it was against the Florida governor for sending migrants on a plane. I think somebody should. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. My question is, the Inflation Reduction Act could bring lots of money to Texas for all kinds of things that we need in our homes. Help us pay for better HVAC and windows and all kinds of things. Do you know where that is in terms of Texas accepting that money, or do you think they'll be stonewalled again?
I don't know, honestly, but I will find out. I went to, so my background in real estate, I went to a sustainable real estate convention not too long ago, and they actually talked about that, and it made me think that Texas will get the funds. But I don't want to say that for sure. We'll do some research.
I'm Catherine Gouvier. I wanted to say something about guns in school. I don't think there will be any change until every parent, every teacher, every school personnel refuses to send their children to go to the schools until there are some gun safety laws. That's one point. Will you explain, because I don't think everybody knows who Tim Dunn is and how much he determines what goes on in Texas?
Well, so like I said, he's a billionaire from the oil industry, and he uses his money to fund political campaigns for Republicans. Right. So he is a Christian nationalist. He believes you're either Christian or you're Marxist. And the Marxists want to do everything, including kill Christians. So, I mean, he makes it sound very scary. And when you repeat the same thing, I think he's either a pastor or very well connected to a church there, started a church school in Midland. And so he has audiences and spreads this false narrative repeatedly. And when you say something so many times, I think people start to believe it, you know. Those other people, not us Christians, are scary people. And I think that's a very scary thing, you know. Yeah, it's an excellent article. They do an amazing job. They interviewed a lot, and one of the men that they interviewed, Chris Tackett, does a lot of research around money in campaigns, and it's great work. And I appreciate that an individual would go to that extent to really show and have transparency around where money is coming from, because you know the governor has gotten millions of dollars, the lieutenant governor. And the lieutenant governor got $3 million just before the impeachment thing. I'm not going to call it a trial because it really wasn't.
Hi, my name is Leo Collis. I believe you kind of touched on my question, but I'll ask it anyway. There's very obvious things going on at the state capitol that defy logic and defy the mission that we believe that all of our elected officials are under, is to care for and make a better place in the world for everybody. But we speak about the governor and his motivations. It seems like his motivations are just to do it it's very harmful, very unkind, it defies anybody's idea, even of Christianity, the kinds of things that I hear coming out of his office. Can you maybe give us some insight about Where is that coming from? What is that motivation?
So I think when someone has been in office for a long time, that becomes their identity, and they can't imagine ever not being in office. So it's how do I maintain my power? How do I maintain my position? And you get to where you're insulated, you're in your bubble, and their bubble is filled with hatred. Their bubble is filled with how do you keep the power? Well, money. We've seen that money influences elections. And so, I also believe, and I went to a couple of events where Kay Bailey Hutchison was the speaker. And she said, the reason we've gotten so polarized in the U.S. is our primary election system. I agree with that. I think when you have so few people voting in primaries, that you do get the extremes, and it pushes your elected officials who've been in office for a while to be more extreme. Because I think the governor, years ago wasn't as extreme as he is now. So it just seems like you have to go further. Okay, well, I've done this. Now what more can I do? We're always like, oh, they've gone as far as they can go on loosening gun laws or, anti-abortion or whatever. We feel like they keep going as far as they can, and they somehow figure out a way to go further. So I think it's just trying to keep power, and that's the only explanation I can come up with.
Thank you. We hear this mantra that Texas is a great low-tax state or whatever, less expensive than California and whatnot. A lot of economists tell us that's a lie, that in fact, when all these people from California come here, all of a sudden they go into shock. And one area of shock, but when you add it up, they're paying more taxes than they were in California. One area, and you're having been in real estate, and what you've already said, is the property tax, which is used because, despite what Bob Bullock said, we don't have an income tax. There's a big problem in property tax in that with respect to higher value commercial and residential properties, the real sales prices are hidden. And that's not the case in many other states. It would seem if we had a requirement of actual revealing what the sales prices are and valuation, we'd be much better off. Where are we on that?
I agree with you, and I've talked to the Texas Realtors because they are, again, a very powerful organization with a lot of money that does not like sales price disclosure. But I've had conversations with them arguing the other side that, look, our appraisal districts, that's their job to determine values. The best way to know values is to know what things sold for. So there have been bills filed, I think, every session I've been. I haven't personally filed them, but other members have. They just don't go anywhere. But it is a conversation worth having. I think last session when I spoke to the government affairs person at the Texas Realtors, they were starting to feel a little more receptive towards sales price disclosure for residential, but not commercial, which honestly, it should be across the board. We'll keep working on that. I agree. We need to.
Thanks, Luther. And Vikki, thank you for being here. I'm David Overton. I co-chair the Social Action Council here at the church. And I'm curious about this. You made the point that a lot of people, most people support like common sense gun laws or expanding Medicaid, but they often won't vote for Democrats. Okay, so they support these progressive positions, but they won't vote for Democrats. How do you overcome that?
I think, again, by education and letting them know what it is Democrats want to do for them. And I think there's an organization out there that's working on having every House race opposed, right? So there's a lot of areas where you don't have anyone running for the state House against the Republican incumbent. And so nobody's out there talking to folks saying, here's what we want to do for you. I went out to Nacogdoches because I have in-laws or family, extended family out there, and spoke. And they were like, they were so interested in hearing what I had to say because they don't hear from a state-level Democrat in their area. And so I think, certainly these were Democrats I was talking to, but across the board, if we can get in front of the Rotary clubs and the nonpartisan groups and say, here's what we're really trying to do, I think perhaps they would say, wow, they are wanting to protect our land. They want to make sure that we have water for the future. They want to make sure we have safe schools. They want to make sure that we get the health care that we need. Like, why wouldn't they vote for that? I think just because they don't know. And they hear a lot of false advertising.
My name's Mike Harris. Hi, Vicki. I just wanted to say something kind of food for thought to generate support for public education. Why can't we have a day of walkout of all teachers, staff, and students one day in April or May to generate statewide support for public schools? I think we would get so much coverage, and it needs to come from you and from the legislature and all these education groups, but you could set aside a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in April or May where all public school students stay home, all teachers stay home, and you would get a lot of publicity and a lot of support.
That's a great idea. Yeah, the wheels are turning. Like who I could reach out to help organize something like that.
Okay. Howdy. Toga Pendrake, IBEW 520. I could talk your ear off. I'm trying not to. You had mentioned the primaries. You had mentioned how they don't work very well, and I actually wanted to speak to that and see if you were aware that a couple different groups, including the police union in Austin and my employer specifically, are asking Republicans to vote in the Democratic primaries to support the candidate specifically that is running against Jose Garza for district attorney, and to see if, one, if you had heard, B, if you have some sort of insight or some way of trying to combat the influence of outside parties and even union parties trying to speak against the union-endorsed candidates.
I was not aware that there was an effort to get people to cross over and vote in the Democratic primary against Jose Garza. So that's the first I'm hearing of it. I know that, I will say a couple of cycles ago, I think the teachers did something similar, trying to get them to vote in the Republican primary against Dan Patrick because he's so opposed to public schools. And in my experience, that crossover thing hasn't ever worked. But, it's a free country. So my idea is having open primaries. A few states do that where you just rank. I know that idea is probably a little ways down the road. So I asked Kay Bailey Hutchison at this luncheon afterwards what she thought of ranked choice voting. Now, Republicans don't like it because in Alaska it kept Sarah Palin from winning election. But in Louisiana, they have a system that she did like. Now, I think maybe we have to come up with a Texas version. I did file a bill last session that said we would allow it in nonpartisan races, just so that people could get an idea of what it means to rank choice vote in like school board, city council, just to expose people to it as a first step. Meanwhile, Senator Hughes was trying to ban ranked choice voting in the state. Thankfully, that bill didn't pass, but neither bill got a hearing in the House. And so we still have some work to do. All of the senators that spoke about it said, oh my God, it would just be too confusing to the voter. I'm just like, no, it's not real hard. You go 1, 2, 3, which is my favorite, my second favorite. I mean, that's not hard. But no, I haven't ever seen it be successful. Who knows? I mean, I guess we just have to rely on our election system and keep working to make it a better election system.
I think we have time for one more quick question.
The best for last. I'm Becky Halpin, and I'm really glad to see you. And it's just amazing to hear about all the things you've done. I had no idea, honestly. Thank you. Yeah. So about the sustainability amendment. I think it's just knock your socks off great to hear about that. It does seem like a hard thing to pass in a way, and I think you're really smart not to call it the Green Amendment. But I think that more and more we can ally with interests that would not normally be democratic to get this kind of bill passed. For instance, I saw this week that Redfin, which is a real estate company, is now doing a air quality index for each of their listings. So you can find out what the air quality is in that area where that listing is. And I think we're going to see more things like water quality having even to do with drinking water, whether or not the drinking water has PFAS in it or not. For example, something that's not treated in most places, but we're understanding is very serious. And things like out in the hill country, and I know we can't mention climate change, but there's so much drought out around Llano right now that insurance companies are refusing to insure properties out there. There's 2 insurance companies now, I can't remember what they are, but we saw last week that they're not going to insure properties out there. They're not writing any new policies out there. So my question is, how can we help you connect the interest that besides the normal environmental groups that would support this group?
Reach out to my office. So, email is just my name, vikki.goodwin@house.texas.gov. Reach out to my office. You can Google me and find contact information that way too, and let us know. We're, like I said, every day I talk to groups, these landowners in West Texas that are concerned about water. We're trying to think outside the box, so it's not just environmental groups, but just kind of a broad spectrum of people.
Representative Vikki Goodwin, thank you so very much for being with us here today. We appreciate what you do for us and the way you represent us, and we'll be there for you. Thank you very much.